Hi, I'm Gareth Green, and in this video I'm going to address a topic that quite a number of people have written to me about, and it's this: dealing with composer's block. Well, this is something that can affect composers, and it actually can affect performers as well. I mean, sometimes as a composer, you sit down to write and the ideas just flow, no trouble at all. And in no time at all, you've got a decent piece of music that you can be really happy about. There are other points out there where you haven't got an idea in your head, nothing under your fingers, nothing coming, no inspiration whatsoever. And that can be a ghastly kind of block that maybe is fairly momentary, and you can come back even in an hour's time and actually all is well. Sometimes it can go on for quite lengthy periods. I've always found it a little bit scary when I'm dealing with commissioned work with deadlines. Deadlines are a great thing for imposing block, I find. Knowing that you've got to write something of a certain length for a certain purpose by a certain date is sure to impose some block on you. So it's something that we all have to deal with, and it happens for performers as well. You'll have all had this experience as performers where sometimes you sit down to play and everything is just going swimmingly, you feel as if you're on fire, you can play anything. Other days where you think, it's just not buzzing today, I don't know what I'm doing, there's kind of wrong notes, things not working, and there's a kind of performer's block. So it's something that can happen to any of us, and of course it's not just musicians. This is something that people in all fields will have experience of. And is it something to do with how we're feeling? Are we a bit too tired? Have we got other distractions in life? Is it something to do with what's going on for us chemically in the brain? I mean, there's all sorts of thinking about it, but nevertheless, it's a reality that we have to deal with. So dealing with composer's block, I've sometimes found, strangely, that those barren periods in writing are sometimes quite productive in the long run. You can have those moments where you're just experiencing that kind of block, and then suddenly they're followed by periods of greater activity, where suddenly you become very creative, and the silence has almost been essential as an opportunity in which to regroup. So one thing I've learned over the years is actually, when you do have those barren periods, try to welcome them. They're kind of opportunities just to kind of shut down for a short time and then to come back to it with a kind of fresh energy. So sometimes maybe they're not such a negative. Maybe they're the prelude to a period of far greater creativity and imagination. So the same thing is true for performance. I've practiced something to the death and it's just not going well at all. And I think that's it. I'm going to take 2 or 3 days off and then I'm going to come back to it. And it suddenly all clicks into place. So that's something to bear in mind, that actually the barren periods might be a positive. And sometimes I think that period of inactivity is just a chance to rest, isn't it? To come back refreshed, come back with new energy, maybe new enthusiasm for the project. Sometimes, you graft away on a project and it starts to grind you down a bit and you need to step back and come back to it. And even the stuff that you've already written, sometimes you can appreciate it with fresh ears, fresh eyes, and evaluate it in a new kind of way and think, actually, that's better than I remember it. Or actually, do you know what? I need to rewrite that. So the brain's had this opportunity to recharge and regroup. So I think those barren periods, in a way, are best regarded as a gift rather than as a hindrance. There's always the fear that when you have these moments of composer's block, that you're never ever going to write again, it's never going to happen, and that's a little bit terrifying, isn't it? So, is there anything we can actually do about it? I think the first thing I'm going to say about it, after what I've already said, is take a deep breath and relax, because if you're experiencing composer's block, you're in very good company. If we just think about composers who experienced it, well, Beethoven, no mean composer, Schubert, Rachmaninoff. I mean, they're just 3 examples of composers who definitely experienced composer's block, often feeling completely paralyzed by the whole thing and wondering if they're ever going to write again. So if it's going to happen to Beethoven, Schubert and Rachmaninoff, well, it's bound to happen to those of us who are lesser mortals. I think another very important thing, certainly in my experience, that can save us during those periods of kind of when we're feeling a bit dry from a creative point of view is technique. I mean, many's the time when I've been asked to produce a piece of music to a specific brief at short notice, and actually I may not have been in the right place or the right mood to write that piece in that moment. But the thing I can always fall back on is the reliance on some technique to produce something. So I know that even if it's not my most inspired piece of writing, I can actually sit down and think, I know how to deal with harmony, I know how to deal with some counterpoint, I know how to deal with some orchestration or writing for voices, and I can always sit back on that technique and come up with something. It may not necessarily be my most creative moment, but the technique has got me through on more than one occasion, if I'm completely honest about it. And interestingly, as I look back on some of those pieces that were written more from a point of view of technique than from inspiration, some of them I've completely chosen to consign to the rubbish bin, and others, somewhat surprisingly, I've kind of looked back on and thought, you know what, that piece was okay. Sometimes I've even thought it's more than okay, really. And one or two have turned out particularly well against the odds. And I've reused them again because I'm actually very happy with them, if the truth be known. And again, I think we're in very good company with composers throughout history. I mean, think, for example, of one of my great musical heroes, Johann Sebastian Bach. I mean, this guy had to turn out huge volumes of music every week for the Lutheran Church. When you imagine that the main service on a Sunday morning could have lasted up to 5 hours in Bach's church, imagine that. He had the chorales to write and harmonise. He had organ music to write. He had the church choir. He had the church orchestra. He had to write a cantata that would be performed each week. 20 minutes worth of music for choir and orchestra, soloists and all the rest of it. I mean, that was a huge volume of music to turn out from one week to the next, besides all the other things that he was also writing. I mean, that was a huge task. And all these other musical commitments he had, and his massive family responsibilities. Can you imagine bringing up so many children? Unbelievable. A guy who had 20 children? Goodness me. There's no doubt that Bach had to rely hugely on his technique. And it's interesting when you look at something fairly straightforward in Bach's repertoire, like the whole set of chorales that he harmonised. Some of those chorales are absolute gems, and some of them are perfectly good, but maybe not quite in the same league. And you think, well, surely that everything that the great Johann Sebastian wrote must have been absolutely wonderful. Well, it's always wonderful, but sometimes it's wonderful plus, and sometimes it's kind of wonderful ordinary, if you like. And you just look at one or two of those chorales and you think, at a human level, maybe Bach had had a bit of a week. Maybe it was Saturday, Sunday's tomorrow, he hasn't quite harmonised the chorale and he's got to knock it up in a hurry. Maybe not best place to do that. He's relied on his technique to do that. So it comes out perfectly well, even if you're thinking, I wonder why that chorale isn't quite as inspired as that other chorale harmonisation. So we're in great company. That's the thing that I'm trying to get hold of. And so if you're serious about being a composer, I'd say the most important thing is make sure you've got plenty of technique. The more technique you have, the more you can rely on it when it comes back to it. I think there's also another reason why relying on technique is quite important. I once remember going to Norway and taking the chance to visit Edvard Grieg's house. And I remember the tour guide taking us into the room in which Grieg used to compose and said something like, you see, now you understand why his music was so wonderful. Here was Grieg sitting at his desk, looking out at that fantastic view, and the music just flowed from his pen. Well, really, I think that's utter rubbish, isn't it? Of course, it's more inspiring to look out at mountains and fjords than it is to look out over the gasworks or whatever it is, or the neighbour's washing. But Grieg wrote great music because his technique was completely sound. Add to that a creative musical imagination and you end up with beautiful, inspired music. But being imaginative without having the technique will leave you in big bother. And I think that is a major problem, that actually some of the people who are writing to me about this are saying, I've got a head full of ideas, and all sorts of great things. Sometimes people share little thoughts with me, musical thoughts, and I think, great, that's a great germ of an idea. It's a great little melody or a great set of chords or whatever it is. But actually, they don't know what to do with it. So that's why technique is important. We want to be able to rely on it, but also we've got to be able to work with the imaginative side of the process. So definitely make sure you've got a sound technique. Maybe your problem is the opposite. You've got the technique, but you just lack the inspiration. Sometimes it can be a simple remedy. I've been in this situation where even when I've got a deadline, I'm sitting there trying to write something from my technique, if you like, and I'm thinking, yeah, but you know what, it's such a rubbish idea. So what do? Take a walk, take an hour out, read an inspirational book, play some wonderful music, spend some time with some interesting people, whatever, listen to some wonderful music, take a holiday in the Norwegian mountains, whatever it takes to get those creative juices flowing, and then come back to it. And it's amazing how sometimes even just an hour away from it makes that huge difference. Other thoughts. You might try writing something in a new style, or try writing for an ensemble outside your norm. I often find that people are sitting in their comfort zone as composers, thinking, well, what I do is I write piano pieces. I always write pieces in this particular style. Okay, well, what happens if you were to break out of that? If you always write piano pieces, nothing wrong with that, by the way, but if you always write piano pieces, well, what happens if you try writing for a string quartet? Immediately people say to me, oh, I'm not a string player, I couldn't possibly do that. You don't have to be a string player to write a string quartet, but it might just make you think slightly differently about aspects of what you're doing. The inspirational ideas might be much the same, but suddenly you're writing for 4 different instruments instead of for 1. And it might make you think slightly differently about how you're dealing with textures and so on. And then actually next time you come back to write a piano piece, you'll find that writing that string quartet movement has informed the writing of the piano piece. If you're always in a particular style, maybe you always write in a kind of romantic style, or you always write ballad songs or something, well, what happens if you experiment with a bit of jazz? Well, of course, people will say, well, I don't know anything about jazz. Well, have a look at some jazz chord schemes. Have a look at some pieces of jazz and see, well, how are ideas improvised around the chords and so on? Could I try doing a bit of that? It doesn't matter if it's not authentic jazz, whatever that is. Actually, it may be a jazz-inspired style that you come out with. It may be that you write in a very kind of traditional classical way. Absolutely fine, nothing wrong with that at all. But it may be that the thing that feels less inspired to you is that actually, you're writing in the style of Brahms or Mendelssohn or Haydn or Mozart or something, but it doesn't actually sound terribly original, and actually it just sounds like one of those great composers on a bad day. Well, that can be a bit demoralizing, actually. Well, what can you do with that? Could you be some kind of neoclassical composer, where you take the ideas and the inspiration from these people who are your kind of role models, and then you try to present it in a new way, so it's got a kind of more modern harmonic spin to it, for example, or it's just a slightly more dissonant approach. I mean, that's just one way of doing it. If you're writing in a classical style, well, why not write in a lighter style? Write a song or something. If you're always working with ballads or something, well, try writing something that's a bit more kind of rocky, a bit more powerful. See where it takes you. And I can guarantee that by moving out of your comfort zone to writing for a different group of instruments or voices, or writing in a slightly different style, you'll end up doing your norm with greater inspiration and with greater technique as well. Here's another idea. I think it's always useful to store musical ideas. And it's interesting that many composers of the past often kept notebooks of musical ideas, as they were going through their sort of daily lives, not necessarily in the midst of composing, suddenly an idea would flash into their head. Some great composer like Mozart would just be traveling about and suddenly an idea, a melodic idea, or some kind of series of chords would come into his mind, jot it down in his little notebook. And sometimes these are ideas that they start to work with in a notebook. They jot down the idea and then they think, oh yes, actually that will work in canon, or maybe it would harmonize this way, or maybe there's an alternative harmonization that would come in later. And they start to kind of sketch a few developments of the idea. Sometimes it's just literally a very short musical snippet. And then when it's the moment to write a new piece, these composers would often then open the notebook and think, right, which of these ideas is going to grab me? Okay, let me lift this idea and grow that into a piece. Now, you see what's good about that is it's separating inspiration from technique. Now, I don't think you can actually really do that in practice. You can't really see those as two separate things. However, what it does enable you to do is this. If you've got an idea that's a moment of inspiration, well, we need to seize that and get the idea kind of recorded somewhere. So, record it, sing it into a voicemail on your phone or something. Jot it down if you like to do things by notation, and then just leave it sitting there. And then next time you want to write something, if you're in one of those moods where you've got the technique but you haven't got the inspiration, well, you had the inspiration when you wrote down that idea. So lift the idea, then allow your technique to work with it. So I think that's quite a useful way of doing things, and especially these days when we've got the tech to jot down ideas very easily. So I think, always jot down things, record ideas when they come to you. I don't know about you, I can be a bit of an insomniac, and every now and again I have some flash of musical inspiration at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I have been known to get out of bed and actually just jot it down, so I've got it there. I find actually if I don't get up and jot it down, I've got it going around my head the rest of the night, and it's probably going to stop me sleeping altogether. So better just to jot it down and it's there. And it's funny because sometimes next morning you look at it and you think, really? What was all that about? It must have been somewhere in my dream world. It's a complete load of rubbish, forget it. Other mornings you wake up and you think, oh, I'm so glad I wrote that down. That's actually going to be useful. I don't know where I'm going to use it, what I'm going to use it in, when I'm going to use it, but it's just there. And then there'll come a moment where you think, oh, I can work with that today. That would be good. You never know when you're going to need ideas, so store them when they come. And I think just this whole thing about coming up with good ideas and the process of composition are not quite the same thing. The former is definitely about inspiration, and that's what dries up when we have these moments of composer's block. And the latter is fundamentally about relying on the fact you've got technique to work with. One other thing I've found over the years for myself and working with composers around the world, there's a danger for some people of overthinking, and the opposite danger for others of underthinking. And these can both be things that kind of block us along the way. So they're kind of opposite dangers that I think are worth just considering for a moment. Sometimes somebody will come up with an idea. It's a perfectly good idea, but then they overthink it. They question every note, every interval, every kind of bit of rhythm. I mean, it's a good thing to kind of work an idea till you're happy with it, but sometimes you can overwork it and kind of paralyze yourself and convince yourself that this is an idea not worth dealing with. So overthinking can be a danger. There comes a point where you've got an idea, you've kind of worked with it a little bit, you're fairly happy with it, and then you just need to get writing. And sometimes as you do get writing, then you're more able to reflect on it as you go. As the thing unfolds, you think, yeah, actually, I see now that I do perhaps need to change that to make it work here. The opposite danger of underthinking, where people just kind of write without really thinking of what they're doing in the first place, and then they kind of wonder why it doesn't really work. And sometimes, the danger of underthinking is that you can then kind of end up with something that's not of great quality, or you end up throwing something away, which actually was the germ of a great idea. I was working with a composer recently who said, well, I've come up with this great melody, but do you know what? I think it's a great melody, but it's a load of rubbish, it doesn't work. So we had a look at it, and actually the problem with the melody was not the melody. The melody worked perfectly well. The problem was the rhythm, because it was a slightly tedious, repetitive rhythm. And as soon as we just kind of worked with the rhythm and developed kind of a rhythmic character into that melody, it completely transformed it. And we didn't change a single note of the melody. We just started to work with what was going on with the rhythm. So it's kind of, the opposite dangers of, do we overthink our way into a kind of paralysis, which can easily happen, or do we underthink and we just get writing something until we've written ourselves into a corner and the thing doesn't work any further? There's a middle ground, which I think is quite important. So the main message I want to send out in this video is this: if you are suffering from composer's block, relax, because the more stressed you are about it, the less able to compose you'll become. Absolutely true for performers as well. You may have some big gig coming up and you're practicing like Billy-O for it and things are just crumbling. Okay, it may seem a strange piece of advice. Relax, take a break, come back to it, and you'll be amazed how you can suddenly compose another day and you can suddenly play another day in the way that you just couldn't do on that particular occasion. So even though this is not an invitation to put off till tomorrow anything that could be achieved today, if you can achieve it today, then go for it. But it's always worth remembering that tomorrow is another day. So if you're dealing with composer's block and it's just not working for you today, well, try one of those distraction techniques, relaxation techniques, come back tomorrow, see what happens. Well, I hope that just helps with a few ideas on dealing with something that does actually quite terrify a lot of composers around the world. Well, if you've enjoyed this video, you may want to go to the Music Matters website and see what's on offer for you there. You might want to join our Maestros program, for example, particularly if you're a composer. The Level 3 Maestro program is essentially for composers. And one of the many perks there is that you can join us for a monthly live stream. You can submit your own composition and receive personal evaluation from me. And we also share that in the group. We have a live chat, very supportive, positive stuff. You also get to see what other composers in the group are doing and hear their music and hear the evaluation that's offered to them. And members of that group are finding that a wonderfully kind of creative space in which to learn from others and improve their own technique and to think about how they develop their own inspiration. So that might be something of particular interest to you. While you're on the website, just click on courses. And when you go to courses, you'll see there's a composer's course. That might be something of interest to you. It may be you're thinking, actually, my problem is I don't really know enough theory or harmony. Well, have a look at the theory courses there, the harmony courses that might be useful to you there. It may be that you're thinking, actually, my problem is I've got all these ideas in my head, but I find it difficult to write them down, to notate them. Well, have a look at our oral dictation course. That's absolutely designed to help you deal with that particular issue. Lots of other courses out there as well. So take a look, see what there is that might be useful to you, and enjoy.